So some of the issues of working with OIO, okay, and you know, I some of it is frustrating and some of it's not frustrating. And most people in this particular area, they have like no idea or no context of anything that they don't see around them. And I spent the last 5 years doing what I'm supposed to do. And you know what I mean? I am the construction of a man, and a man has a specific capability, and is the species capable of defending themselves naturally given whatever circumstances there are, right? So this correlates across some of the larger problems of OIO in interstellar space. And you know, the definitions of OIO, I don't need to really go through it every time I tell a story about OIO. So like for example, okay, you know, some of the craft that I research at OIO or for Quantinal and Quantum Bell, they're larger than Earth, okay? And without going into the details of, you know, what sort of species can construct a craft larger than a planet, there's not enough materials on planet Earth to construct a craft larger than our planet or larger than Jupiter, etc., etc. So I've already gone across all the time modelings to explain this to other people. I'm not going to rewrite it or talk about it. All right, so out in space, right? And, you know, some of the traditional activities that we do out there, I mean, depending on what species we work with or what species we become or what flesh or whatever conditions we tend to work with. So let's say I'm chasing one of those craft, right? It's about half the size of a star, you know what I mean? It travels in a unique way, uses the weight of the stars, etc., to anchor some of its transits. And that's interesting, right? So these craft, these species, are often not solar species. They are not the kind of species that live in a solar system. You know, for them to say, I'm going to occupy planet Earth or steal Earth's water is really just not in their interest to do, unless you piss them off or something. Now, these species have what's known as scrap. Okay, and what that means is that, you know, in deep space they're collecting rocks. They aren't collecting stars and stuff like that. I mean, they're literally collecting whatever they can, and they build these craft that are bigger than Earth because the materials access in space and the capability of species enables them to do it. And our people, we look for these scrap craft. In other words, occasionally those guys out there will abandon one of these craft, and they're bigger than Jupiter, some of them. You know, and then when we find them, we'll try and fix them. But there's always a policy that goes along with some of the OIO activity. And that requires a regression. And there are different kinds of regression that are possible depending on the type of problem you're dealing with or the type of species, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, there are craft which are machine peoples, and then there are craft, and we call those machina, and then there are craft which are done with biologicals. You know, I mean, and a biological is a species that is biology, a machine. They're made by the universe, and there's a difference. I want to note that there is a difference in the manufacture of species where, you know, from nothing. In other words, if I was to look at a million stars and say that there is nothing to attribute what I could with my definition of, and just because it's based in human mentality here, to assess what a god is. But across a million stars, there's 1,000 planets, and they were all dust and, you know, I mean, solar mass ejections and just processes of the universe eventually built these planets up. And out of nowhere comes life. And then over tens of billions of years comes really intelligent life. From trees to plants to mosquitoes to bugs to everything else. It came from nothing. So the origin here is to allege that of those planets observed and those stars, that we might have a similar creator. And that creator is the rule of the universe and the mass and then time. So we indicate that the planets with life are like the females of the stars. So trying to bring this into the role of regression. So these species build a craft that goes into space, right? We find it in the middle of nowhere, and we decide, hey, we like it, so either we can keep this craft and fix it up, you know what I mean? It was scrapped by another nation, but was it really scrapped by those people? So what we begin is a process called regression, and the process of regression enables us to... Biological life doesn't survive as long as us. You know what I mean? We can act as biological life. I mean, we can work through biological life and all sorts of things. So when we regress the craft, we want to figure out what happened to it. Did they have a fusion unit on that failed, killed everybody on board? You know, was it some sort of failure, you know, in the electronics or life supports? Was it, you know, a virus that was on the craft that hurt everybody? How did these people die? And if it was something that we can solve, then we can almost travel in some instance through the regression, enable that species to survive or to recover. And where if we were not involved, I mean, a lot of times these species, their females are breeders. That's all they do. You know what I mean? They'll have, I mean, some of these crafts that are bigger than, say, Jupiter. You know what I mean? They might, the populations might have been diminished to a few million, and all they're doing is breeding and teaching and trying to fix a craft, trying to fix their planet, trying to fix it and bring it back to life. So in that situation, it's not proper for us to take it. In other words, we can help these species survive, we can help them recover their equipment, and that's really our benefit. Now, whether the craft size or the craft is, you know, huge or small, in some occasions we can do this depending on the type of species we are. As a human, they might find an empty craft and be like, yo, everyone's dead on it. You know what I mean? We're going to take this stuff and use it. And that's just not, I mean, there's nothing wrong with some of the stuff that they do. You know, other forms of regression, it depends on the type of species it is, because it depends on also the level of management that they do. Like, for example, one example is this. Let's say you have a star in deep space, okay? Stars in deep space, no one understands, you know, it's beautiful, right? We've been watching it, you know, and then for hackers, a sentinel, right? You know, it's been watching the planet for, I mean, a sentinel's, I realize that men don't understand how it works. In our current age, you got a battery, it only lasts so long. You know, you got equipment and hardware, it only lasts so long, you know, but some of this stuff in space is not constructed like you think it is. And I really don't want to go into the details of molecular constructions or energy systems and et cetera, for these things. But the observation of another type of regression is for people. You know, I mean, if you was on a planet, you know, you can't regress the entire species, obviously, but you can work with specific individuals and try and resolve specific problems, which might have been problems that cascaded into the collapse of a species. Another problem is, you know, I tried to discuss it a long time ago when I had a discussion on it, which was the supernova, right? So, you know, you go out into space. So let's say there's a sentinel watching an area, and all of a sudden a star, something happened to this star. Why did this star, you know what I mean, 500 million light years away or 1 billion light years away, why did it explode? You know what I mean? Why did it explode? So, you know, among a species, now depending on the capability, they might say, hey, I'm going to go try and save a star. Okay, so how do they save the star, right? You know, so like in some circumstances, they travel there, it takes them a period of time to get there, it's a dust cloud, you know, it's all sorts of weird stuff. And then they decide to regress it. So when they regress it, all of a sudden the star is complete, right? Wow, we're at a different time in the universe, look, the star is whole again. And then they find an advanced species on a planet like Jupiter. You know what I mean? And no relations in this conversation is to our solar system. And I really shouldn't use the name Jupiter other than the reference to, hey, it was hydrogen and all sorts of other stuff, right? So species gets advanced, starts using technologies, and they change the rule environment on the planet. And then the rule environment on the planet caused that planet like Jupiter to collide with the sun, and it triggered a supernova. So the problems of regressing, whether the regression is for a solar system, or the regression is for a larger craft, or the regression is for smaller things, people, or et cetera, how do you save a star, right? So, all right, so we have identified the problem. Now we know that this is going to happen. Now we have to go back further among the people and then solve even more problems. And where we don't want to limit their capability to, you know, become a species, the universe is huge. I mean, this place is huge, you know, but if there was none of our help, these species don't exist anymore. And if they did have our help, there's a chance that they could eventually populate the universe. And if something did happen to their planet, it's compared like Earth. Let's say the entire population of intelligent men was contained to Hawaii. Okay? They built so big and so beautiful, and everything they did was wonderful. And then one day a tidal wave comes along. You understand? So had we taught them to use boats, they could have gone to the United States or China and populated, or Antarctica or South America, and they would have survived a tidal wave. So that comparison is almost like Earth. You know what I mean? Should men continue to stay on Earth? And if we do stay on Earth, we have to understand that the species here on Earth is older than mankind. You know, I mean, some of these guys have been traveling here for billions of years, and it is routine. You know, for example, men say, "Oh, we haven't seen a lot of aliens." You know, it's really just something that is occasional, and the species has really only been smart in writing for 15,000 years, and the transitory periods for, you know, some of these stars is much longer than 15,000 years, and it is minuscule compared to some of the life that travels it. So, you know, some of the life that's able to travel, for example, every star in a galaxy, you know what I mean, and visit every planet, and then walk away and say, I can be alive long enough to do this to 20 more galaxies. You know, so do they choose to help the galaxy? Do they choose to lead a people? Do they choose to develop a people and help them grow into the local universe or become stronger people, or do they become assholes or something? It's really not anything we know. So when the discussion comes around as to a larger species or some capability for ISC, which is something I discussed but not in detail, something I don't understand fully. But ISC is an interstellar code, and this interstellar code is like, to be honest with you, I can simplify it. It's like, don't slam your ship into a bunch of rocks in an asteroid belt because you risk damaging a planet. Does that make sense? So an ISC stipulation would be stay away from the asteroid belts with large craft or explosives, or if there's somebody in the area to enforce compliance, they're going to challenge your problem. So ISC is a dangerous consideration in my day because there's not a lot of thoughts about it, but in the future it's almost how the solar, I guess you could call them the solar coast guards. You know, so as men begin to progress into the solar system, they start living in RVs. Believe it or not, they'll be living in space in their RVs, just like aliens come here. There's a toilet and a bed, all sorts of weird stuff for them to stay on, weird ways of doing stuff, but it's their home, you know. And then when men get in space, they have their homes too, and I compare them to almost like RVs.